Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? Among the news items we have for you this week, scientists claim they've trained an AI to forecast over 1,000 diseases years before a diagnosis should otherwise have occurred. A weight loss mechanism that could be as good as exercise, at least in convincing your body that you've exercised, or you could engage in the alternative of actual exercise. A mammal dragged its butt and left a rather unique fossil remain about 120,000 years ago. A Fat Bear Week has finished, and there are, a number of submissions. Qualcomm has acquired the Italian hardware company Arduino, or at least in the process of doing so, and ghost particles could boost gold production in neutron star collision. The timestamps for these and other news items can be found in the description box below. We'll start with predicting disease, because stopping disease before it happens is so much easier than actually dealing with it once it's occurred, or theoretically anyway. The problem is that you don't know the disease is going to occur until it does occur. And this is where the AI training, which it's not AI, it's an advanced LLM, but differences aside, what they've done is take a large data set and throw it into this machine learning algorithm and figure out what variables could be associated with development of certain diseases. And this is great. Our only initial concern is that they've named said machine, system, AI, Delphi, 2M, which is great, except the last time something that predicts the future, named Delphi, was active, it ended up with exile, incest, and someone blinding themselves after realizing what they had done, which is never a good sign. So this might well be a, how do we word this politely? Something of a doomed prospect before it's begun based on that alone. The other issue is that this is very much based on biobank data. The UK has a huge data set that they've tapped into for it. It allows for medical research, and, well, there's about 500,000 people involved, so it's not as though this is a insignificant data set. The problem with it is very simple. It is all theory. You have an existing data set, now you need to apply it and put it into practice. And we don't yet see any reliable proof that this has a real-world application so far. It's not to say that, let's say, with more testing, trials, etc., it might not be useful, but at the moment, Delphi is, about as useful as the real Oracle of Delphi. It gives you a theoretical outcome that may or may not happen depending on what you do. So this is effectively the next stage of medical care, just not quite there yet. There are 5 sleep profiles that might affect your health though, and this comes from research that is arguing that the quality of a person's sleep with a variety of health, psychological, and lifestyle outcomes does vary, which is like saying water is wet. The research is actually not that surprising. There are areas of research that have an unusual amount of interest. The size of male genitalia, the amount of effort going into developing better options for Viagra, and, sleep. The study looked at about 770 adults. They're all young adults, and what they're trying to figure out is, not just your sleep, but your health and lifestyle characteristics, which sounds a lot like the machines are studying us. Much like a machine, the researchers did categorize humans into 5 distinct groups, let's say. The distinct groups are based on the sleep, bio, and psychosocial profiles they developed from all these individuals. The first profile is basically poor sleep with negative mental health outcomes, which is basically hand in hand with reality, because the less well you sleep, the more tired you are, the more cranky you are, the more likely you are to not react well to various things. Those in the second group had no major sleep problems, but still had a variety of mental health issues. The third was largely defined by the use of sleep aid medications. The individuals had a greater conscientiousness and reported feeling more satisfied in their friendships and emotional support network, but they also had a whole bunch of cognitive problems, likely as a result from taking medication that affects their sleeping, as it will directly influence the brain. The fourth profile was linked to sleep duration with a few hours of rest associated with more aggressive behavior and difficulty with emotional processing, language, and fluid intelligence. And the fifth was driven largely by sleep disturbances and waking frequently throughout the night. These individuals were also more aggressive, had cognitive issues, but were also more likely to have thought problems like anxiety, high blood pressure, be smokers, and show symptoms of alcohol dependence. Which, okay, cool. All we really want to know at this point though is there actually a single group out there that appears to have good sleep patterns and isn't somehow antisocial or socially destructive, which the research doesn't really point out or identify in any meaningful way. And something that's going to help some people, but not a lot of others, is that there's a weight loss mechanism that could theoretically trick your body into burning more calories, thinking that you are effectively exercising, which, you could do the actual thing of exercising instead, but sure. Stanford University and Baylor College of Medicine was doing this research using mice, so this is already a huge problem, let's say. The red flag is that most rodent-based research will not ever translate to human-based research because of the hurdle of translating it between species. But apparently there are ways we could possibly make this work. The scientists involved looked at the bloodstreams of mice that had to exercise hard. What they found was that there was a metabolite called LAC-VHE. It was in the mouse brain and it's thought to stop a specific neural trigger that leads to feeding. In effect, it's saying, you're full and you're tired, wait. Which, again, isn't that surprising. This is what they're thinking could prove to be a novel drug. It could be the operative word here. Admittedly, the fact that this, along with the other previously mentioned items, are such a major area of interest when there is a effectively viable and perfectly reasonable solution called exercise out there is always surprising. But then again, we have Ozempic as well, which obviously is widely used now for weight loss, at least temporarily. There is some, let's say, human research though that does demonstrate this is probably going to be useful, probably being the operative word there, because they looked at humans who had exercised, and they found that humans exercising had the same increase in the LAC-PHE levels after exercise, and they lost more abdominal fat, which tends to be a major target of many individuals trying to lose weight. Ironically, individuals seek to decrease abdominal fat while increasing the fat around their ass and other parts of the body, but that's a separate issue. So what they understand so far is that there are reasonably obvious pathways now that they've looked into this, and if it works the same way in humans as it does in mice, it is a theoretical drug target that could prove useful. Again, could being the operative word. Next we move on to caffeine pouches and the fact that they are something of a risk. The, let's say, novel approach to getting your coffee hit is, well, just that. It's essentially the same thing as trying to, say, consume a cup of coffee or opening a can of energy drink or similar. What they've done is, well, they've possibly created an issue where particularly teenagers, because teenagers are young and dumb, will exacerbate underlying health conditions, either become wildly addicted to caffeine, or absolutely destroy their, well, let's say, politely, sleep schedule and other ability to operate in normal society, more so than your usual teenager struggles with. The small packages are essentially a chip packet of sorts. Each contains a small amount of ground caffeine, flavorings, and sometimes a variety of other additions that are meant to make it better. Honestly speaking, it's just like an energy drink. The primary active ingredients are going to be sugar, caffeine, and that's it. There is nothing else. All the other things are just marketing. The idea is that you put this under your lip or tongue and it goes straight into your bloodstream, the same way most medications trying to directly access the human body do. And so you get your caffeine hit that much sooner. The problem with this is that you're not, let's say, you're not exactly spacing it out and giving it a reasonable amount of time to be absorbed. So this is the first issue. The second issue, it's relatively discreet, so people can continue to take their hit of various things, whether it's in the gym, at school, work, and so on. The typical cup of coffee contains about 100 milligrams. Your typical pouch of caffeine carries down between 25 and 200. This means that you can either get a quarter of the expected hit or twice the expected hit. Of course, on top of that, you have the fact that the average human safe amount each day is about 400 milligrams. So let's say that you're taking these and you consume just 2 packages a day. You might have met a quarter of that, or you might have exceeded that. That's the issue. And more so when we mentioned that this can interact with other drugs and particularly other conditions leading to problems. For example, if you either don't really pay attention and you keep using them throughout the day because you're getting more and more tired because your body is shutting down, not because you're actually tired, you end up exacerbating that issue because you have caused caffeine toxicity. In other instances, you may have heart issues that you're not aware of or are overlooking, and consuming these are going to create a problem. The other problem here is that these are technically an illegal grey zone. They're not food and they're not medicine. They're in that weird middle place. They're sort of like supplements. In fact, you could arguably say they are supplements. Because of this, there is very much a lack of regulation, and you don't necessarily know what else is being added to it, and you don't know about the quality control. As a result, these are not necessarily a massive danger, but they are a distinct risk. Again, not necessarily the worst possible thing, but they are definitely a thing that you should be concerned about. Going on to the final medical news we have for you. Soccer could actually be causing head injuries. Not the fact that soccer is a head injury itself, although you could certainly make that argument, given the debate over whether or not it should be called soccer, football, or whatever your local terminology actually is. But there is a concern with it. Beyond the fact that you might become a Manchester fan or similar, there's a concern that the headbutts that are allowed in the game could actually be causing something that's not the same as, but effectively equivalent to concussion. Let's be clear about this. It is a relatively small study looking at 352 amateur adult soccer players. So this is a, let's say, major caveat. But they did look at about a year's worth of data, and the average was about 3 headers per a player, and they showed that there is actually a certain amount of damage to the outer part of the brain, that being the cortex, the wrinkles. The damage is right behind the eyes, and was in the same location and demonstrated the, not necessarily same effect, but the same sort of effect regardless of age or sex. This would indicate that the individuals who were hit do have some modicum of brain damage, and that brain damage is at least somewhat unique, we say somewhat for good reason, specifically to soccer, given the nature of how you play the game. This kind of sports ball has its own particular rules, and as such, the effects would be specific to them. Now, we don't see any particular comparative group, which is the only downside, but theoretically, the study does demonstrate that playing soccer does lead to a certain amount of impaired cognitive function, which also explains those who support Manchester United. And the other concern with this study, let's call it, is that the research, given what it is and where it's looking at, may show that there is more damage that's been underreported or underdiagnosed, perhaps is the more appropriate term, in other sports, because where they're looking at is rather hard to detect, and so they've had to use a somewhat more a nuanced and quirky approach to detecting brain damage in this area. So soccer may be signs of something more extensive and more serious. Next we move on to something that's all about butts. Admittedly, small fairy butts in this case, and butts that are about 120,000 years old. It's a fossil remain from southern Africa. The rock Hyraxes, or the dassies, are very chunky critters with short legs and no tail, or at least none on the outside of their body. They spend most of their time on rocky outcrops enjoying the sun, but on occasion they do something weird. They will just drag their butt along the ground like a dog. Now, in the case of this, it's a sign that they're just, being themselves, really. unlike dogs where it could be a sign of parasitic infection. So what is going on and why is this worth mentioning? Well, it's the fact that this same behavior has left interesting, let's say, fossil remains. Why we mention all of this is that there's some interesting fossil remains that have been found over an epoch that ranges somewhere around 400,000 years. The cemented dunes known as the Eolianite and the Pleistocene epoch contain what is two fossilized traces that appear to have been made by the rock Hyrax, literally dragging its butt along the ground, and possibly pooping while it did it, which would indicate that this may not just be dragging its butt along the ground, but using rocks as toilet paper, which, if true, is a very brave decision by the chunky little fluffballs. Moving on now, we have the Fat Bear Week 2025 champion, and its name is the Chunk. The Chunk is probably the most appropriate name to this. The beast has effectively had to consume thousands of kilograms of salmon in Alaska's Katmai National Park to be voted the chubbiest bear. The contest is tongue-in-cheek, unlike, say, the Ben Spoon Award, which is somewhat satirical, but actually serious. This is purely in good fun. Admittedly, the bear did only just win. Admittedly, he was competing with the previous two-time winner, Grazer. This is one of the few instances where we would say the internet sharing pictures of animals is actually quite a good idea, as its sole purpose is to spread awareness of what's going on in the background and how these animals are being affected by human habitation.
Walking in the woods, walking in the woods, just looking for a place where to eat all my food. Psst, psst.
Hey, little girl, come here for a second. That's a nice picnic basket you got there.
Yeah, it's okay.
You got some nice sandwiches in there, I bet.
Sure, I suppose.
I think this is a good place for your picnic.
Yeah, I don't know.
Here, let me set it up for you.
You get the food yet, Yogi? Shh.
In human habitation-related news, we have Jane Goodall, the world-renowned primatologist, has died at the age of 91. She's basically famous for being something of a conservationist and activist, and for being the person who spent a stupid amount of time with gorillas, and led to a variety of Hallmark movies, Disney movies, etc. Now, the work she did has captivated many people for a long time, and, well, admittedly, her work is not unreasonable. What she did was, at least for the time, very novel. This allowed Jane Goodall to identify different behaviors, some of which have challenged what could be kindly described as human-centric research, or at least human supremacy. That being that chimpanzees use tools, and that either we need to redefine tool use, redefine what it is to be a human, or accept that chimpanzees are getting very close, if not are humans. So naturally, this is a questionable area of debate. A certain level of irony, Qualcomm has acquired the Italian hardware company Arduino to try and push deeper into robotics. This is something of a mixed development, let's say. Qualcomm is the same company that makes a surprising number of mobile phone processors, tablets, similar low-level hardware for computers and similar. Basically, it's any device that's more powerful than your, let's say, remote control or similar, but not as powerful as a console, a computer, or something like that, a proper computer, not something like, say, a Chromebook. This means they can provide relatively cheap options, relative being a somewhat subjective assessment, but you'll understand surely. Whereas Arduino focuses on very low-end, very cheap, easily available hardware. This is the problem. The announcement came on Tuesday from memory, and it will rely on Qualcomm acquiring Arduino for undisclosed terms, which is somewhat unfortunate. Good news, to some extent, is that the Italian-based company would become an independent subsidiary of Qualcomm. This means that we shouldn't see any major changes in their operations. It shouldn't be the operative term here. The reason Qualcomm wants to get involved with Arduino is that they actually provide a lot of very low-end, very cheap, mostly single-application little boards, essentially, That is, if you needed to do one thing, but do it reliably, you use an Arduino. For example, do you want a door opener? Well, you buy one of these, you type your code in, you do it, and that's it. You can do it at home, it's not hard. But this does open up the door for Qualcomm to be able to do a whole range of things with tinkerers, hobbyists, and even companies at the lowest levels of the robotic industry. Products that, market share we should say, that Qualcomm just can't access with its current range of products, let's say. The development does have some reciprocal benefits, let's say. The availability now of Qualcomm chips for Arduino does mean they can offer a variety of more powerful boards, such as the Uno Q, which is priced at somewhere between $45 and $55. This would come with the Qualcomm Dragonwing processor. At the moment, some Arduino boards can be sold for very little, arguably a few dollars, sometimes considerably more, and depending on the circumstances, almost less. The little chips on board can run something like Linux and can do a fair amount despite them being so cheap and relatively readily available. In similar sorts of technology hardware news, we want to talk about Open Printer. Open Printer is effectively a printer, generally speaking using some sort of roll of paper, and if you need to, certainly you can try and print with a more standard sheets of paper that avoids all of the issues to do with DRM, digital rights management. When you, say, buy a package of printer ink, you put it in your printer and you don't use it for ages because you don't need to print anything. You simply want to have the option available to you. You go to print something and suddenly your printer says, your ink has expired. This is exactly what they're trying to avoid, and rightly so. There is no way in the world that ink expires, and it's one of the more frustrating things that have caused very bad publicity for a variety of companies. Mostly we're talking about companies like HP, but theoretically Brother is working its way towards the same outcome. The reality is that you basically take the cartridges that it uses, you refill them with your ink, and that's it. The printer can also provide a variety of shapes, sizes, and other things that are arguably somewhat more useful, and importantly, most of the parts inside the printer are replaceable. This means you're no longer looking at having to stuff around, trying to make things happen that don't need to happen. Instead, you simply open up your printer, and take out the broken component, replace it with a new component, and done. No replacing whole printers because one thing broke. Of course, the project itself is, relatively new and very much based on crowdfunding. Despite this, it is a very solid little printer for what it is. The black and white print capacity is 600 dpi or dots per inch, and color is 1200 dpi. It can use cartridges, either black or color, or both black and color, that are refillable. The speed has not been established yet, which is a downside, but it does allow for just about every size of printing paper to be used. If you use the roll, it basically prints everything and anything, or it can work with various other sizes. Curiously, it is powered by a Raspberry Pi, similar to the Arduino, but more powerful. The other thing is that it will use the Creative Commons by NC SA 4.0 license. This means that its files, electronics, mechanical design, along with firmware code and bill of materials will be known. What they're hoping is people will be able to repair, upgrade, and contribute improvements to the printer over time. In and of itself, this design isn't necessarily perfect, but what it will do is put a lot more pressure back on those manufacturers that are using DRM in all of their parts to not be dickheads about everything and actually sell printer ink that doesn't expire and theoretically can be refilled. And next we have what could possibly produce a boost gold production in neutron star collisions. It's a product called ghost particles that in simulations affect how neutrinos change their development during merger events, let's say. By tweaking a few small variables within it, they're able to alter the outcome of this, and as a result, they can produce heavier process elements such as gold and platinum. This, again, is theoretically great if we were able to make stars explode and similar, so obviously not particularly helpful. But with the increasing development of fusion technology, particularly France's fusion technology, this may be increasingly important, as it would open the door for the opportunity to create various precious metals as a byproduct of that process. Admittedly, that is arguably decades away from being put into practice, mostly because those particles that are very low mass and have limited interaction with other particles come in different flavors to start with, whether they're electron, muon, or tau. Secondary to that is that we need to get the actual fusion reactors to be working at a stable level for long times, and finally, well, we need to get their interactions and reactions to be predictable and reliable. This is where things get to be a little more challenging. The electron-type neutrinos take a neutron, one of the basic parts of an atom, and transform it into the other two, either a proton or an electron. But muon-type neutrinos can't do this. So we get differences in the conversion of neutrinos based on how many neutrons are available in said system. This means we have some control over the impact and creation of heavy metals and rare earth elements, some being the key word there. And next we have a lesson in why doing dumb shit is still dumb. Admittedly not the dumbest of dumb things we've seen, but still rather hilarious. What you see here is a warning sign about having stolen a relatively not precious, but certainly a dangerous rock from a stupid store. We say stupid based on what it's called and also what appears to be the content of said store. In this case, there was a specimen contained within a glass bell jar type arrangement, and somebody has reached into it with their bare hands, taken it, put it in their jacket pocket and left the store, presumably thinking that it's a particularly nice and fancy thing, and because it's semi-protected, it must therefore need to be protected from shoplifting, and unsuccessfully so. But no, the protection was not for the thing itself, although to an extent it was. Or rather, it's so that nobody went and stupidly went and touched it. Unfortunately, this idiot has not only done so with their bare hands, but put it in their jacket, thereby destroying said interesting rock-type thing, and covering themselves with said rock once it's crumbled, and contaminated, let's say, their jacket. The reason the individual would now be experiencing significant sickness is that they appear to have put a rather dangerous kind of rock into their pocket, something that apparently contains antimony sulfide. Antimony sulfide can also lead to exactly the symptoms described at the bottom of the post, let's say. As a result, it's an example of doing something stupid and getting stupid rewards. Or as the kids would say, fuck around and find out. In similar news, we have RFKrayKray. RFKrayKray wants placebo-controlled trials of vaccines. This isn't an option. This isn't an option for a very simple reason. Placebo controls require that half of the individuals, possibly more, receive what is, for all intents and purposes, no treatment, which, considering what vaccines are, isn't allowable under the usual ethics rules. In fact, just about all of the ethics rules. So no. As much as RFKrayKray says, oh no, they need to do unvaccinated versus vaccinated studies, no, they don't, because they can't, which is the first issue with this. The second issue is that they have done those studies. They do them when they were first being approved for availability to the general public, whether it's the FDA, European medical authorizations, and so on. What happens is that during the phase 1, phase 2 trials, some individuals get the vaccine, some get a placebo, and they figure out, is there a difference? You don't do that in phase 3 trials, because phase 3 trials are more, in this case, looking at, does this work? And how well does it work once you know it does work? So no, there's no frightened of results. It's that ethically, they cannot do what is being described. It's the ethics that is the issue. But then again, we don't expect RFKrayKray to have any real understanding of ethics, and given his nonsense, the fact that he basically led to the death of people in Samoa because he spouted bullshit, and everything else he has said since. In somewhat more entertaining news, we have the Nobel Prize Committee. Not the Nobel Prize Committee themselves, but that they've been unable to actually achieve something due to the most benign of reasons. One of the winners is unable to be contacted because they're off the grid going on a backpacking trip. Yes, the researcher is off the grid and unable to be contacted, which, considering that they're undergoing a digital detox, kind of makes sense. But their work itself is focusing on the role of particularly T cells and regulatory T cells and how the immune system operates. But that also means that he isn't aware that he's won the Nobel Prize for physiology or medicine, which means when he's coming back, he's going to both regret having a digital detox and possibly be overjoyed. The final news we have for you is that, asteroid watching has proven just about as useless as always. With one asteroid, meteor, not quite sure what to call it at this moment, nearly hitting Earth. It came within 270 miles. That's somewhere in the ballpark of 400 kilometers, and nobody noticed until it was gone already. Understand that this height, or this distance from Earth, is equivalent to the International Space Station's distance. Yes, something flew by as close as something you can see with the naked eye at the right time, and nobody noticed it until it was gone. One reason for this is simply its location. Where it flew over Earth was Antarctica, and this was on the 1st of October. So it's not as though we're talking about anything particularly crazy. It's not going to inconvenience, we would say anyone, if it lands in Antarctica. But there's a good chance that penguins, seals, etc. would be very disturbed with the landing of this relatively unexpected visitor. This is admittedly not the closest thing to have come by Earth, with the next closest, or the closest contender, let's say, being just 368 kilometers, so about 30 odd kilometers closer to Earth. The key thing here is that we didn't notice it until it was gone. Understand, this is not necessarily something that will destroy Earth, although certainly make life very uncomfortable for quite a while, but it is still something that we didn't notice. It's why we would argue that although as much as the, defense system in Starship Troopers is seemingly crazy, it might actually have some value, let's call it. Not for asteroids of this size, rather for more significant asteroids that would cause problems. That's all the news we have for you this week. Thank you for watching. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. And please do post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.